I were to say, I'm just going to try to avoid chocolate 90% of the time and indulge 10% of the time. Most people don't realize you can extinguish a craving in the same way that you can form a craving, and that's where the real peace. Strong cravings are actually a sign of a strong mind, not of a sick mind. The problem is that we live in a very diseased environment. Go to the convenience store, buy 100,000 calories for $100, and then you can walk across the street and do it again.
Welcome to the Hope Natural Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Erin Ellis, your host. On this show, we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. Today's guest brings a thoughtful and evidence-grounded perspective on something many of us know all too well, the pull of cravings and the way they shape our eating habits. Dr. Glenn Livingston is a psychologist and the creator of Defeat Your Cravings, a method and coaching approach grounded in decades of research and real-world experience helping people understand and reduce the power of cravings in their lives. His work has reached over 1 million readers and thousands of clients, drawing on both scientific insights into how cravings form and a practical understanding of how to shift long-standing patterns. He is the author of Defeat Your Cravings, a comprehensive update of his work that blends behavior sciences with clear strategies to reduce impossible to resist urges, decrease how often we give in, and free up mental space so food thoughts don't dominate our day. Dr. Glenn also hosts a running podcast under the same name, offers live coaching and support groups focused on lasting behavior change, and helps people navigate the intersection of psychology, food environment, and identity around eating. Today, we're going to talk about how cravings really work, why willpower alone rarely solves the problem, and what it takes to build a more peaceful relationship with food. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Livingston.
My goodness, that's probably the best introduction I've had. Thank you so much for putting that together. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back. You were on my podcast a while back, so I think you're my first repeat guest besides myself. Welcome.
What an honor. Well, it's a delight to do that, and I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Before we dive into all things cravings, food noise, tell me about how you got into what you're doing.
I'm not just a doctor that wanted to work with overeaters. I had a really serious problem myself, and I always joke that if you got to the Woodbury Country Deli after me and you didn't have any pizza or muffins or chocolate left, then it's probably because you got there after me. So that was in Woodbury, New York. I was almost 300 pounds. I'm about 220 now, 2.25, something like that. And I spent a lifetime trying to figure it out the traditional ways. I'm from a family of 17 psychotherapists, and so if something breaks in the house, we all ask how it feels and nobody can fix it. I assumed it was a psychological problem. I figured if I could fill the hole in my heart, then I would stop trying to fill it with food in my stomach. And it didn't work. It worked to make me a more compassionate and loving person. And it worked to absolve a lot of the self-hatred that I felt, but it didn't work with food. I would get a little thinner and a lot fatter and a little thinner and a lot fatter. Somewhere around 40, I put a couple of things together that really changed my paradigm. I'd been consulting for the big food industry, and I saw them engineering these hyperpalatable concentrations of starch, sugar, excitotoxins, and fat. It was all engineered to hit the bliss point in the reptilian brain without giving you the nutrition to feel satisfied. And the reptilian brain doesn't really know love. The reptilian brain knows eat, mate, or kill. So this is the reptilian brain, and this is the neocortex on top of it. This is what says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact that will that have on your loved ones, your tribe, your music and spirituality. So delay the impulse. But focusing on love doesn't really help you to deal with the fact that the reptilian brain is designed to push the rational brain out of the way when it perceives there to be an emergency. And all these big food companies and the pace of modern life seem to tacitly support each other to slowly kill ourselves with food and laugh it off as if it's, everything in moderation is okay, which was just a perfect storm. And all this loving myself thing was not going to help. I had to design a different system, and it was kind of an outtake on some things I saw in the alternative addiction treatment world. It had mostly to do with designing ways to wake up when the reptilian brain was trying to push the rational brain out of the way, identifying the thoughts that justified that behavior, and eventually identifying how the cravings were formed and how you could extinguish them more importantly. Most people don't realize you can extinguish a craving in the same way you can form a craving. And that's where the real peace came in. That's the short story.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
We'll dive into some of the science and philosophy behind it. Tell me, what are the most common misconceptions about food cravings and why this causes people to unwittingly perpetuate
There are
them?
few of them. There are a few of them. One is the idea that rules are a bad thing, that because it is a bad thing to become too perfectionistic after you've made a mistake. However, to get rid of rules entirely because you might make a mistake is the mistake. Because if I were to say, I'm just going to try to avoid chocolate 90% of the time and indulge 10% of the time, I'm putting myself in a situation where, although it sounds like a good idea, every time I'm in front of a chocolate bar, I have to make another chocolate decision. Willpower is the fuel that allows us to make good decisions, and you only get so much of it every day. This is why people start off in the morning with the best of intentions, and then at 3 o'clock, there's a chocolate bar on the counter at the coffee break. They say, oh, well, what the hell? I'll just start again tomorrow. What you want to do instead is come up with a very clear boundary that says, well, I'm never going to have chocolate during the week again. I'll only ever have it on, Saturdays after my workouts, and no more than 4 ounces. That way you've made all your decisions for the week. And people are frightened to do that because they're frightened that if they make a mistake, they have to go off the rails. But that's kind of silly. That's kind of like saying when I'm aiming at the bullseye as an archer, if I don't hit the bullseye, I'm going to say screw it and just shoot all the arrows into the air. You assess by how much, in what direction do you make the mistake, and how do you make adjustments so that you can more likely hit the bullseye afterwards. So I call it committing with perfection, but forgiving yourself with dignity. I try to help people not be so frightened of making hard and fast rules because they provide you with a feedback loop that allows you to get better and better and better. The second reason that people make serious mistakes with regards to cravings is that they think difficulty with cravings is a sign of a sick mind, like you have a disease or something wrong with you. But if you take a second and think about it, ask yourself, what would cravings have done for us 100,000 years ago? We're still essentially living in that body, right? So 100,000 years ago, the people with cravings, with more serious cravings, that were more likely to survive because they were more motivated to do what was necessary to go get food. They would pay attention to the cues that led them to food. They would have the energy and motivation to go chase it down and hunt it and kill it or gather it. I tell people that strong cravings are actually a sign of a strong mind, not of a sick mind. The problem is that we live in a very diseased environment. You can go down to the convenience store, buy 100,000 calories for $100, and then walk across the street and do it again. Whereas that was not the case 100,000 years ago. So the big food industry and the advertising industry has figured out how to take serious advantage of our evolutionary buttons, our evolutionary desires. But if you think that you're diseased, then you think, well, there's nothing I can do about it. If I make a mistake, I have to keep going further. I don't have the ability to resist this, especially not on my own. There's something wrong with me. If you think there's something wrong with you, then the questions you start to ask are, why can't I stop eating? What's wrong with me that I can't stop eating? The questions that we ask direct our brain what evidence to collect. So you're telling your brain to look for evidence that you can't stop eating, and you're going to find it. You're going to find that evidence if you do that, and you'll develop the failure identity. Whereas if you say to yourself, how did I stop eating at 5 cupcakes instead of 15? And I ate the whole pizza, but I didn't eat the box. If you are ruthlessly solution focused, there's a book called Ruthless Solution Focus. If you're ruthlessly focused on what you did right and how can you get better, then you're asking your brain, to find evidence that you can get better, and you will, and you'll develop a success identity. Can I give you two more?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other two reasons they're a little more complicated, but they have to do with the response pattern we observe in mammals for the extinction curve. Most people think that if you stop rewarding a craving, first of all, cravings come in, let's call them food cue craving pairs. So a caveman sees a monkey and the monkey leads him to a banana tree. The next time the caveman sees the caveman gets really, really happy and very motivated to pursue the monkey to a banana tree. That's a food cue craving pair. And the purpose of that is to find food. The purpose of that is to acquire calories more efficiently and effectively than just wandering around the savannah looking for banana trees. In our modern time, a craving cue might be something like the donut store sign on the highway that triggers me to drive in and eat 4 donuts every time on the way home, and then I develop a little punch. Or it could be the smell of the salt water at the beach, or the feel of it on your skin that makes you want ice cream in the summer. It could even be an internal feeling. It could be an emotional state where I'm feeling excessively sad or angry or anxious. And I've trained myself that in previous times, I usually went to food to quote unquote numb out. There's a lot more going on than just numbing out, but that's how people think about it. Well, when you do that, you're training your body to look for those states and maybe produce them more. Those are what food cues are. To extinguish a craving, you want to remove the reward from the cue. So it could be as simple as saying, I never stop at donut stores on the way home from work. If it's a daily habit, it takes about 30 to 45 days to be safe before that craving will be labeled dormant. Cravings are never erased because the body doesn't want to forget how to find food. So the brain thinks that this craving was keeping you alive, so it's not going to forget it. However, the brain also does not want to waste energy. If that food cue stops leading to the reward, it will gradually extinguish the response. It'll say, I don't want to waste this body's energy on looking for a reward that's not there. But before it does that, it goes through several gyrations. Most people think the response cue will just go down in a straight line when you remove the reward. It doesn't, and that leads to some serious mistakes. What happens is there is a little honeymoon period where it does go down fairly quickly right away. But then somewhere in the 4 to 10 day mark, it gets worse than it ever was. Then it goes down, and then there are a couple of additional little bumps. What's going on with that is I call it the where the heck, and sometimes I use nastier words, but where the heck is my banana response? So I'm used to seeing a monkey and getting the bananas, running to the banana tree. I'm used to seeing the donut store sign and getting my donuts. Now all of a sudden, where the heck are my donuts? I don't have any donuts. What's going on? Well, in primitive times, it was more valuable to have a monkey that led you to a banana tree half the time or even 20% of the time versus having no monkey at all. It saved us energy. We could acquire calories more efficiently if we held on to these predictors. And so before the brain relinquishes the learning, it's going to say, maybe I just have to work harder. What the heck is going on? Maybe I'd have to work harder. Maybe I have to look for 2 monkeys. Maybe I have to run faster. Maybe I have to climb a little higher. And so that's what we call the extinction burst, somewhere in the 4 to 10 day mark. And what happens here is that most people go, holy Toledo, I can't deal with this. I'm going to have these awful cravings forever. This is going to last forever. I call it your food monster. Your food monster is saying, this is going to last forever. You better feed me because it's never going to go away, right? And then what they do is they give in. Well, what have they done? They've taught the brain that it was exactly right. You have to work harder to get the food now. So you've actually reinforced the cravings. Now you're going to have worse cravings than you had before. What you have to do is push through. The only way out is through. There are some other things you can do to make it easier. We can talk about that afterwards if you remind me. But you have to push through, and then you get on the way down. Now, what happens somewhere around the 20 to 30 day mark is people are feeling good. It's like, I got this, man. And these donuts are science. They don't bother me anymore. I got this handled, right? And so then they give in at that point and say, you know what? I don't think the donuts were really such a problem in the first place. I could probably just have a couple. I can handle a couple of donuts. And so they give it at that point, reset the whole thing. Um, the lesson is you have to push through. The other thing that happens is people don't take extinction as a serious event. They remove the source of calories from their life, but they don't ask themselves, what are they going to add instead? They're usually in a hurry to lose weight, putting the brain into a kind of a famine state. It's not a real famine state, but the brain believes that's in a famine state. And so this, this, oh my God, we better find food response then becomes even stronger. And so I always tell people, pick a craving, flood your body with nutrition at a slight caloric deficit. Try not to lose more than a pound or so per week for the purpose of reducing cravings. If your doctor says, look, this is an emergency and I need you to be 50 pounds thinner as soon as possible, then by all means you have to deal with this. But pick one area, support yourself in the rest of your life. Get some additional sleep, drink some additional water, make sure you're connecting with your friends and your family. Try to minimize other decisions over the course of your life. Decisions burn willpower. And it's not just food decisions, which rules start to eliminate. It's who's going to take Jenny to soccer practice, and should I delete, defer, delegate, or act on this email right now? It's what outfit am I going to wear to my date on Saturday night? It's all of that wears down your willpower. So where you can, try to go, when you're going through this cravings extinction, take it seriously and support yourself so you don't become, we would call it organismically dysregulated, which is a fancy term for stressed out, and the brain thinks that it's got to do something to find calories and find, it's not just comfort, but it actually thinks it's keeping you alive. That's why you have the jokes about, just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt, because this is really a survival response gone wrong. Those are the main reasons that people struggle with cravings indefinitely, because they're acting in the wrong way. They also don't understand that most people with most cravings, you don't necessarily have to give it up entirely. Sometimes you do. There are some people who can't have any sugar, flour, or alcohol. I eventually decided to give up chocolate entirely. It was just easier to have none than to have some. But the brain is very capable of recognizing complex food cues. So what I mean by that is I can say, I'll only have donuts on Friday afternoons on the way home from work, and no more than one. And only if I worked out in the morning. And because there's a very regular cue, I've got to work out, it's got to be Friday, I can only have one, then the brain gets used to only firing on Friday afternoons when it's time to do that, and those conditions have occurred. It's kind of like if you go to a casino, you ever see those little old ladies sitting on the slot machines, and they just got to be there, got to be there, got to be there. It's a compulsion. It's called variable ratio reinforcement when you don't know when the reinforcer is coming. It comes sometimes, but not always, and you don't know when it's coming. If we rigged the casino to only reward on Friday afternoon, the whole place is going to be empty, or at least of those little old ladies on the slot machines. It's going to be empty until Friday afternoon, and then there's going to be a rush, and you might have a riot for the. So the brain is capable of recognizing conditional rewards, and the idea is that if you want to regulate something, you want to moderate rather than abstain, be very specific about the context it's allowed in. The plain English vernacular I use for that is, what role do you want this food to play in your life? When do you want to have it? When can't you have it? How much? I don't tell anybody what they can eat or what they can't eat. 2 out of 3 people usually will learn to be able to do that. So those are the mistakes people make with cravings. Those are the big ones.
And that, I know we're talking mostly about food, but I would assume this background pertains to alcohol as well,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Except that there are other dangers involved with alcohol. Like if you are addicted to alcohol, be playing with fire by trying to moderate it. I think the developer of moderation management was actually arrested for drunk driving, and I think she might have actually killed somebody. I forget what I shouldn't say that so casually, but I'm pretty sure something serious happen. And so the point is, there's a moral decision to be made. Should you or shouldn't
Yeah.
you abstain? And you don't really have the time to
Right.
mess around trying to learn how to moderate. That's the difference.
Okay. So a big thing in our world now is these peptides, GLP-1s, GLP-3s. So how would those injections interact with your methods of defeating cravings?
Generally speaking, no doctor is going to tell you to rely entirely on the GLP-1s. Medications often stop working at the 4 to 5 year mark in a lot of studies. You can have side effects that make it difficult for you to tolerate a given medication or the dosage that you really need to take to be effective. And it's a crutch, but it's okay to use crutches if you need to recover. If you really can't do it without it. If you had a car accident and broke your leg, do you want to use the crutch and the cast and everything the doctor makes available to you, but you also want to go to physical therapy and build yourself up so eventually you're not going to be reliant on the crutches, or at least not solely reliant on the crutches. I think that these are very deep neurological grooves. These are not comfortable cravings to get over. That extinction burst can be miserable for some people, and some people can't get past it. Not that they can't. Often, when they know what's going on, they can get past it more easily than they could ever before. Um, but 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 a lot of people really feel like they can't. And if you are diabetic, if you're at risk of cardiovascular events, you know if you're the balance of your medical situation suggests that you know the there are risks to taking the GLP-1s, but there are risks to remaining obese also. And so for some people, it's a godsend because they need that support. And then suddenly, when they have that
Yeah.
support, these extinction bursts become more manageable and you can go through them. You can do the decoupling of the food stimulus and the reward so you can finally get through it. Sometimes it's really helpful. I'm not a medical doctor, so I tell people that's a decision to make with your medical doctors. If you were my sister or my brother, it's mostly women that work with me. I never really understood why. But if you were my sister or my brother, I would say, if there is no medical emergency, and please see the doctor to be sure that's the case. But if there's no medical reason that you can't try diet and lifestyle first, try diet and lifestyle first, because there are a series of trade-offs with any medication, and
Yeah.
But I'm glad they exist. I think they're a miracle for some people. I do also think that they are being taken too casually, and I think we're going to have an epidemic in 4 or 5 years when they don't work or when they cease working as well.
I totally agree with
Oh,
that. There's a time and a place for really anything, prescription, pharmaceutical, things like that. I don't think, in my opinion, it's getting to the root cause as to how we got here in the first place,
yeah, yeah.
right?
I eat a cholesterol-free life. I have for 20 years. Um, my blood levels have been really good for a very long time. I still had a heart attack and atherosclerosis due to genetics. I do take medication to manage that because I've done what I can do physically to, with diet and lifestyle to manage that. So,
So let's speak briefly about how does the problem of craving start way before you're even tempted?
yeah, this is something that I've realized more recently. So, the progression of my recovery was at the moment of temptation. I I recognized that it's almost like I wasn't there when I was overeating. My early work was all about inserting a pause at the moment of temptation. Your brain wants to automate the acquisition of calories as much as you can. That's why it's so hard to think about it. That's why you often wake up at the back of the driveway, with donut crumbs in your mouth and all over the car, and you don't quite remember pulling in and choosing a donut and walking to the counter and giving the nice lady a couple of bucks, and walking out and going to the back of the driveway and doing that. In some ways, the fact that you need techniques to intervene at the moment of temptation means that you've made mistakes way up the line. Rivers are easier to cross at their source. The dysregulation that results in the false perception of emergency, which results in cravings, can be prevented with structure. So you could have a rule that says, I always do food prep on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And I check my inventory. I make sure that I have enough greens and beans and whatever you eat. I don't tell people what to eat, but you make sure that you have enough food available. You might have a couple of check boxes to say, I had my breakfast, I had my lunch, I got my time outside, I had these other sources of dopamine in my life, so that you have systems in place that keep you regulated, that prevent these urgent situations from coming up in the first place. That's what I mean by that. A lot of times when people have that screw it, just do it reaction, it could actually start 2 or 3 days beforehand. It could actually start with skipping a meal, on Thursday that leads to the craving on Saturday. It could start with sleep or all the things that we talked about. That's what I mean, is inserting structure earlier on, because rivers are easier to cross at their source when they're just a trickle than when they're a roaring stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. This has been such an interesting conversation. I'm going to wrap it up with one question I ask all my guests. You've had this question before. It's the same question. What is your best or favorite health tip that you can share with the audience?
Half a pound of baby leafy green, not baby, but tender leafy green vegetables. So not kale or cabbage, but, lettuce or spinach or, something that's really easy to chew and get down. Put it in the blender with a bunch of water. And if you should ever make an eating mistake, go and drink that fairly quickly. Assuming there's no medical reason you can't have greens, because there are some reasons you can't do that. I believe this works because when you eat the bags or boxes or containers, when you have a half a gallon of ice cream or, a bag or 5 of potato chips, your survival drive, the part of you that's looking for nourishment and calories to stay alive, it's been fooled. There's a biological error that occurs, and it thinks the bags and the boxes and containers is where the good stuff is. And so you go and you have these leafy greens, and it starts to move the junk through you. But more importantly, it reminds your survival drive there is actually real good stuff available. And you'll find that obsession and negativity that occurs after you have a binge or you've made a serious food mistake, it's damped down tremendously if you'll just have a half a pound of leafy greens afterwards. So that's my
good tip.
Yeah.
Haven't heard that one.
I think we figured that out. I think we figured that out.
Half a pound of greens. Do it.
Yeah.
And report back to us. Well, Dr. Glenn, it's been wonderful having you on the show once again. I really appreciate your time. You have a book. It's available Kindle, Nook, PDF format for free at defeatyourcravings.com.
It is.
We'll make sure we have that linked in the show notes, and then all of his social media handles are at defeatyourcravings.com.
Yep, there's a bunch more
so
free stuff available at defeatyourcravings.com.